Human gets arrogant alien diplomat pregnant for revenge. She's absolutely furious. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with tension as Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the assembled delegates representing dozens of species from across the known galaxy. Her dark eyes scanned the ornate hall with its crystalline walls and floating platforms where various alien dignitaries observed the proceedings with barely concealed disdain. At the center of the elevated platform sat Ambassador Kira of the Zirellan Empire, a tall, elegant figure with pale blue skin and silver hair that cascaded down her shoulders like liquid mercury. Elena had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. 3 years of diplomatic training, language studies, and cultural immersion, all to represent humanity in their first formal application to join the Galactic Trade Federation. The humans had discovered faster than light travel only a decade ago, and their crude ships had stumbled upon a Valerian patrol vessel near the outer rim of their solar system. What followed was a series of increasingly frustrating negotiations that had led to this final hearing. Kira rose from her seat with fluid grace, her violet eyes fixed on Elena with unmistakable contempt. When she spoke, her voice carried the musical quality typical of her species, but the words dripped with condescension. She began by questioning humanity's technological capabilities, pointing out their primitive propulsion systems and lack of proper energy shielding. She dismissed their cultural achievements as barbaric, noting their history of warfare and environmental destruction. Most cutting of all, she suggested that humans were too emotionally unstable and reproductively chaotic to be trusted with membership in civilized galactic society. Elena felt her jaw clench as Kira continued her systematic dismantling of humanity's application. The Valerian ambassador spoke of humans as if they were particularly unpleasant insects that had somehow learned to speak. She referenced classified reports about human behavior that should not have been accessible to the Galactic Federation, suggesting that someone had been spying on Earth for far longer than officially acknowledged. The casual way Kira dismissed billions of human lives and thousands of years of human achievement made Elena's blood boil. The other delegates seemed to accept Kira's assessment without question. The insectoid Chitauri representative clicked his mandibles in what Elena had learned was their equivalent of agreeing laughter. The gaseous ethereal ambassador's containment suit glowed brighter, indicating amusement or approval. Even the normally neutral synthetic collective's representative nodded its mechanical head in apparent accord with Kira's evaluation. Elena knew she had to respond, but protocol demanded she wait until Kira finished her presentation. She used the time to study her opponent more carefully. Kira was undeniably beautiful by any species standards, with features that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. Her movements were precise and controlled, suggesting extensive training in diplomatic arts. But there was something else in her posture and expression that Elena recognized from her years in human politics: arrogance backed by genuine intelligence, but also a certain blindness that came from never being truly challenged. When Kira finally concluded her remarks with a formal recommendation that humanity's application be denied, Elena rose to respond. She kept her voice steady and professional as she addressed each of Kira's points in turn. She acknowledged humanity's technological limitations while highlighting their rapid rate of advancement. She admitted their troubled history while emphasizing their recent achievements in global cooperation and environmental restoration. Most importantly, she challenged Kira's assertions about human emotional instability by pointing out that many of humanity's greatest achievements had come from their ability to feel deeply and act decisively. The hall fell silent as Elena finished her rebuttal. For a moment she thought she might have swayed some of the delegates. Then Kira smiled, a cold expression that never reached her eyes, and delivered what was clearly intended as a killing blow. She suggested that Elena's emotional response to criticism proved her point about human instability and recommended that humanity be quarantined to their home system until they could evolve beyond their primitive psychological patterns. Elena felt something snap inside her. Not her composure, that remained intact, but rather her faith in the possibility of achieving justice through proper channels. She had spent years believing that competence and preparation would be enough to overcome prejudice. Now she realized that Kira and her allies had already decided humanity's fate long before this hearing began. The entire proceeding was nothing more than elaborate theater, designed to provide legal cover for discrimination. As the session ended with the predictable vote against humanity's membership, Elena watched Kira accept congratulations from her fellow delegates. The Valerian ambassador's satisfaction was evident in every graceful gesture, and Elena found herself studying her opponent with new interest. She had originally planned to return to Earth and recommend that humanity continue working toward eventual membership. Now she began to consider alternative approaches that might prove more effective in dealing with enemies who respected only strength and feared only consequences. That evening, Elena attended the traditional post-session reception held in the station's diplomatic quarter. She had changed from her formal presentation attire into something more suitable for social interaction. A simple black dress that complemented her athletic build and drew attention to her distinctly human features. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, making small talk with various delegates, while keeping one eye on Kira's location at all times. The Valerian ambassador was holding court near the viewing windows that displayed the star field beyond the station. She was describing some recent cultural achievement of her homeworld to a group of admiring junior diplomats from various species. Elena approached the group and listened politely as Kira explained the complex artistic principles behind Valerian crystal singing. When the conversation naturally shifted to comparative cultural studies, Elena seized the opportunity to engage directly. She began by asking seemingly innocent questions about Valerian reproduction and family structures. Kira responded with the confidence of someone who enjoyed demonstrating her knowledge to a clearly inferior species. Elena learned that Valerians had evolved from a species that practiced seasonal mating with complex courtship rituals. Modern Valerians had largely abandoned these practices in favor of more rational approaches to reproduction, but the biological imperatives remained dormant in their genetic code. As the conversation continued, Elena gradually steered the discussion toward human approaches to relationships and reproduction. She spoke candidly about human emotional complexity and the role of physical attraction in their culture. She noticed that Kira's responses became more engaged and less condescending as the topic shifted away from formal diplomacy toward more personal matters. There was something in the Valerian's violet eyes that suggested curiosity about human emotional and physical responses. Elena excused herself from the group and moved to the station's observation deck where she could think more clearly. The diplomatic quarter was designed to accommodate various species' environmental needs, and the observation deck provided a neutral space where different atmospheric requirements could be managed. She stood at the massive, transparent aluminum windows and watched the stars while considering her options. She had always prided herself on being a rational person who approached problems with careful analysis and appropriate responses. But Kira's casual dismissal of humanity had awakened something deeper and more primal in her consciousness. She found herself thinking less like a diplomat and more like a warrior, assessing an enemy's weaknesses. The Valerian ambassador's obvious intelligence and cultural sophistication made her a formidable opponent, but Elena had detected subtle signs of curiosity and perhaps even attraction during their conversation. An idea began to form in Elena's mind, one that her diplomatic training would have rejected as unprofessional and potentially dangerous. But her diplomatic training had failed to secure humanity's rightful place in the galactic community. Perhaps it was time to consider approaches that relied on more fundamental aspects of biological and psychological manipulation. When Kira appeared at the observation deck 20 minutes later, Elena was not entirely surprised. The Valerian approached with her characteristic grace, but there was something different in her manner, less formal authority and more personal interest. She commented on the beauty of the star field and asked about Elena's impressions of the station's design. The conversation that followed was notably more relaxed than their earlier exchanges. Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the discussion despite her growing plans for revenge. Kira was undeniably intelligent and possessed a dry sense of humor that emerged when she was not performing her official duties. She spoke about her homeworld with genuine affection and described the challenges of maintaining diplomatic neutrality while advocating for her species' interests. For a moment, Elena almost regretted the path her thoughts were taking. Then Kira made a casual reference to humanity's eventual evolution beyond their current primitive state, and the spell was broken. Elena realized that even in this more relaxed setting, the Valerian ambassador could not conceive of humans as equals. Her apparent friendliness was the sort of condescending kindness one might show to a particularly clever pet. The insult was made worse by the fact that it was clearly unconscious. Kira simply could not imagine that Elena might be offended by such characterizations. Elena made her decision in that moment. She would seduce Kira not out of attraction or affection, but as a calculated act of revenge against someone who had dismissed her entire species as inferior. The plan that formed in her mind was complex and would require careful execution, but she was confident in her ability to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She had spent years studying alien psychology and Valerian cultural patterns in particular. She knew exactly how to appeal to Kira's specific combination of intellectual pride and suppressed biological drives. The seduction began immediately, though Elena was careful to make it appear entirely natural. She shifted her body language to become more open and attentive. She asked questions that demonstrated genuine interest in Kira's thoughts and experiences. Most importantly, she began to challenge some of Kira's statements in ways that engaged her intellectual curiosity rather than triggering defensive responses. She wanted the Valerian to see her as an interesting puzzle rather than a diplomatic opponent. Over the course of the next hour, Elena gradually escalated the intimacy of their conversation. She shared carefully chosen personal details about her own life and encouraged Kira to do the same. She learned about the Valerian's childhood on a world where individual achievement was valued above all else, and where emotional expression was considered a sign of weakness. She began to understand why Kira had developed such a rigid control over her own responses, and why she found human emotional openness both fascinating and threatening. As the evening progressed, Elena suggested they continue their conversation in a more private setting. She had researched the station's layout and knew that the diplomatic quarters included private meeting rooms designed for sensitive negotiations. These rooms were equipped with environmental controls that could accommodate multiple species and privacy shields that would prevent any monitoring of their activities. Kira agreed to the suggestion with what Elena interpreted as carefully controlled anticipation. The private meeting room was elegantly appointed with furniture that could be adjusted for different species' physical requirements. Elena activated the privacy shields and adjusted the lighting to create a more intimate atmosphere. She had studied Valerian responses to environmental stimuli and knew that subtle changes in light spectrum and temperature could trigger physiological responses that would make Kira more susceptible to seduction. What followed was a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological and physical manipulation. Elena used every technique she had learned from her study of Valerian culture, combined with her natural understanding of attraction and desire. She presented herself as someone who could appreciate Kira's intelligence and sophistication, while simultaneously awakening biological responses that the Valerian had spent years suppressing. The combination of intellectual engagement and physical temptation proved irresistible to someone who had been trained to control every aspect of her emotional and physical responses. Elena was careful to make the seduction appear mutual and spontaneous. She responded to Kira's advances with apparent surprise and growing desire, while secretly calculating each move to achieve maximum psychological impact. When they finally came together physically, Elena made sure the experience was intense enough to create lasting memories and emotional associations. She knew that Valerians formed strong psychological bonds with their sexual partners, and she intended to exploit this vulnerability to its fullest extent. The physical relationship that developed over the next several weeks was passionate and seemingly genuine. Elena had not expected to find Kira so responsive to human approaches to intimacy. The Valerian's controlled exterior concealed depths of emotion and desire that had been suppressed by years of diplomatic training. Elena found herself almost admiring her opponent's capacity for passion, even as she systematically exploited it for her own purposes. Elena was careful to maintain the pretense of a developing romantic relationship, while secretly documenting every detail of their interactions. She learned about Valerian physiology and psychology in ways that no human had ever experienced. She discovered that despite their advanced technology and sophisticated culture, Valerians remained vulnerable to the same biological drives that motivated more primitive species. This knowledge would prove crucial to her ultimate plan. The revelation of Kira's pregnancy came exactly as Elena had calculated it would. She had studied Valerian reproductive cycles and timed their encounters to maximize the probability of conception. When Kira announced the news, Elena responded with apparent shock and concern, while inwardly celebrating the success of her manipulation. She knew that pregnancy would fundamentally alter Kira's emotional and psychological state in ways that would make her more vulnerable to the revenge Elena had planned. Kira's reaction to the pregnancy was everything Elena had hoped for and more. The controlled diplomatic mask cracked completely, revealing the depth of her fury and humiliation. She accused Elena of deliberately seeking to impregnate her as part of some primitive human mating ritual. She demanded to know if Elena had planned this outcome from the beginning, and grew even more enraged when Elena's responses seemed to confirm her suspicions. Elena allowed herself to show genuine satisfaction at Kira's distress. She had spent months pretending to care for someone who had dismissed her entire species as inferior. Now she could finally drop the pretense and reveal her true feelings. She told Kira exactly what she thought of her arrogance and prejudice. She explained how she had studied Valerian psychology, specifically to find ways to manipulate and humiliate her. Most importantly, she made it clear that the pregnancy was indeed part of a calculated revenge against someone who had thought herself superior to human capabilities. The confrontation that followed was everything Elena had imagined and more. Kira's fury was magnificent to behold as she realized the full extent of her manipulation. She had been outmaneuvered by someone she had considered intellectually and culturally inferior. The pregnancy represented not just an inconvenience, but a fundamental challenge to her sense of self and her place in the galactic hierarchy. Elena had not merely defeated her, she had done so using the very biological and emotional processes that Valerians considered primitive and beneath their notice. Elena watched Kira's reaction with cold satisfaction. The Valerian ambassador's perfect composure had shattered completely, revealing the emotional volatility that lay beneath her sophisticated exterior. She raged about human deception and primitive cunning, while Elena calmly pointed out that she had simply used the tools available to her. If Valerians considered emotion and biology to be weaknesses, then perhaps they should not have made themselves vulnerable to those same forces. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was chaotic, as Kira struggled to comprehend the full implications of her situation. She would have to explain her condition to her superiors and colleagues, who had always seen her as a model of Valerian self-control. She would have to carry and raise a half-human child in a society that viewed genetic mixing as a form of contamination. Most importantly, she would have to live with the knowledge that she had been systematically deceived and manipulated by someone she had considered inferior. Elena felt no sympathy for Kira's distress. She had achieved exactly what she had set out to accomplish, a form of revenge that would have lasting consequences for someone who had thought herself beyond human reach. The pregnancy would serve as a permanent reminder of human capabilities and the dangers of underestimating species that appeared primitive or emotionally unstable. Elena had proven that humans could be just as calculating and ruthless as any other species when circumstances demanded it. The broader implications of Elena's actions began to unfold over the following weeks. News of the pregnancy spread through the diplomatic community, despite efforts to keep it confidential. The scandal damaged Kira's reputation and called into question her judgment in dealing with human representatives. More importantly, it forced the Galactic Federation to reconsider their assumptions about human, psychological, and cultural capabilities. Elena found herself recalled to Earth, where her actions received mixed reactions from human leadership. Some praised her for demonstrating human resilience and adaptability in the face of discrimination. Others criticized her for potentially damaging humanity's long-term diplomatic prospects. Elena accepted both praise and criticism with equal calm, knowing that she had achieved her primary objective of proving that humans could not be dismissed or underestimated. The pregnancy progressed normally according to Valerian standards, though the hybrid nature of the child created new challenges for both species' medical professionals. Elena remained involved in the situation, partly out of genuine curiosity about the child's development and partly to maintain pressure on Kira and her supporters. She made it clear that she considered the child to be as much human as Valerian and would not accept any attempts to exclude human influence from its upbringing. Kira's transformation during the pregnancy was remarkable to observe. The controlled diplomat gradually gave way to someone more emotionally open and psychologically complex. She struggled with her changing body and the social implications of her situation, but also began to show signs of genuine attachment to the developing child. Elena watched these changes with interest, noting how biological processes could override even the most sophisticated cultural conditioning. The birth of the child marked a turning point in the relationship between humans and Valerians. The baby displayed characteristics of both species, creating a living symbol of the potential for cooperation between different forms of life. Elena looked at her biological offspring with complex emotions, recognizing both the success of her revenge and the unexpected consequences of her actions. She had created new life as part of a plan for destruction, but the child represented possibilities that transcended her original intentions. Kira's attitude toward Elena evolved throughout the pregnancy and after the birth. Her initial fury gave way to a grudging respect for Elena's intelligence and determination. She began to understand that human emotional complexity was not a weakness, but a different form of strength that could be used to achieve objectives that pure logic might not accomplish. The relationship between the two women became something unprecedented in galactic diplomatic history. Neither friendship nor pure antagonism, but a complex acknowledgement of each other's capabilities. Elena's ultimate success extended beyond her personal revenge against Kira. The scandal and its aftermath forced the Galactic Federation to re-examine their policies regarding species membership and cultural evaluation. Humanity's application was reconsidered in light of new evidence about their psychological sophistication and strategic capabilities. Elena had proven that humans could not be safely dismissed or ignored by supposedly superior civilizations. The child grew up as a bridge between two worlds, carrying genetic and cultural inheritance from both species. Elena maintained an active role in its upbringing, while Kira adapted to motherhood with characteristic determination. The experience changed both women in fundamental ways that neither had anticipated when their conflict began. Elena learned that revenge could have unintended consequences that transcended its original purposes. Kira discovered that her assumptions about human inferiority had been dangerously wrong. Years later, Elena would reflect on the events that had changed her life and potentially altered the course of human history. She had set out to punish someone who had insulted her species and had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations. But she had also created new responsibilities and relationships that would define the rest of her life. The child she had conceived as an act of revenge had become a symbol of hope for cooperation between different forms of intelligent life. The diplomatic implications of Elena's actions continued to unfold for decades afterward. Humanity eventually gained membership in the Galactic Federation, partly due to the respect earned through Elena's demonstration of human capabilities. The relationship between humans and Valerians evolved from mutual suspicion to cautious cooperation, as both species learned to appreciate each other's strengths and weaknesses. Elena had achieved her revenge, but in doing so had opened possibilities for understanding that transcended the original conflict. Elena's story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating other species and the unexpected consequences of prejudice and arrogance. She had proven that humans possessed sophisticated capabilities for long-term planning and psychological manipulation that rivaled any other species in the galaxy. Her actions had changed not only her own life, but the trajectory of human development and their place in the broader galactic community. The child that had begun as an instrument of revenge grew up to become a skilled diplomat who used their unique heritage to bridge differences between species. Elena watched their development with pride and amazement, recognizing that her actions had created something far more significant than simple revenge. She had given birth to a new form of life that embodied the potential for cooperation and understanding between different forms of intelligence. In the end, Elena's revenge had achieved everything she had hoped for and more. She had humiliated an arrogant opponent, proven human capabilities, and secured her species' place in the galactic community. But she had also learned that actions taken in anger and revenge could have consequences that extended far beyond their original intentions. The child she had conceived as a weapon had become a bridge to a future she had never imagined possible. Kira's journey from arrogant diplomat to devoted mother had been equally transformative. She had learned that her assumptions about human inferiority had been dangerously wrong, and that emotional complexity could be a source of strength rather than weakness. The experience had changed her fundamental understanding of intelligence and capability, forcing her to reconsider her entire world view. The legacy of Elena's actions would influence diplomatic relations for generations to come. She had demonstrated that humans could be formidable opponents when pushed too far, and that underestimating their capabilities could have serious consequences. Her story became a reminder that intelligence and strength could take many forms, and that prejudice and arrogance could be dangerous weaknesses even for supposedly superior civilizations. Elena's name became synonymous with human determination and the refusal to accept discrimination or dismissal. She had proven that humans deserved respect and recognition as equals in the galactic community. Her actions had opened doors that might have remained closed for centuries, and had established humanity as a force to be reckoned with in interstellar politics. The child continued to grow and develop, embodying the best qualities of both species, while transcending the limitations of either. Elena watched their progress with satisfaction, knowing that her act of revenge had ultimately created something beautiful and hopeful. She had given birth to the future of interspecies cooperation and understanding. As Elena grew older, she often reflected on the events that had defined her life and shaped human history. She had achieved her revenge against an arrogant opponent, but in doing so had created new possibilities for growth and understanding. The child she had conceived in anger had become a symbol of hope for peaceful coexistence between different forms of intelligent life. The story of Elena's revenge became a legend among both humans and aliens, illustrating the complex relationships between different species and the unexpected consequences of prejudice and arrogance. She had proven that humans possessed capabilities that exceeded the expectations of supposedly superior civilizations, and that underestimating their potential could have serious consequences. Elena's ultimate legacy was not just the revenge she had achieved, but the new understanding she had created between different forms of life. She had demonstrated that intelligence and strength could take many forms, and that cooperation between species was possible despite their differences. Her story became a foundation for future diplomatic relations, and a reminder that respect and understanding were essential for peaceful coexistence in the galaxy.